A racist police officer blatantly stops a car and arrests a black couple, claiming they don't deserve to be behind the wheel of a luxury vehicle. This seemingly immovable injustice is met with an unexpected response from the husband, leaving the officer stunned and turning the situation on its head. This dramatic twist will keep you on the edge of your seat. Subscribe now to uncover shocking developments and the inspiring resilience behind every challenge. It was late at night, and the deserted suburban road was illuminated only by the faint glow of streetlights. Emily and James Carter, an African-American couple, were on their way home after a celebration of their soon-to-be-born child. 8 months pregnant, Emily sat in the back seat for comfort, gently stroking her belly and smiling softly as she felt the baby's tiny kicks. James, focused and attentive, drove the car cautiously, not wanting to worry his wife despite the late hour and the long drive ahead. The atmosphere in the car was peaceful. James occasionally glanced at his wife through the rearview mirror, offering her a reassuring smile. But the tranquility didn't last long. From behind, the blinding flashes of a police car's lights suddenly appeared, accompanied by the piercing wail of its siren. Startled but composed, James quickly regained his calm. "It's okay. They're probably just checking," he said, trying to maintain a light tone to reassure Emily. He slowly pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. 2 officers stepped out of the patrol car, one a burly middle-aged man named Carter, and the other a younger, sharp-looking officer named Blake. Their gazes immediately made James uneasy. "Driver's license and registration," Carter demanded coldly. James carefully reached for his wallet, keeping his demeanor polite. "Yes, officer. Here are my documents. We're just heading home." Blake approached the car, peering inside through the window, his gaze lingering on Emily. "Seems like this car is a bit too nice for people like you," he remarked, smirking disdainfully. Emily felt a lump in her throat, her hands instinctively clutching her belly. James glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his expression hardening, though he still worked to keep his composure. "We haven't done anything wrong. This is my car, and my wife is pregnant. We're just trying to get home." But Carter wasn't about to let the matter rest. "Something doesn't seem right. People like you don't typically drive cars like this around here. Maybe we need to take a closer look," he said, leaning closer to the window, his eyes brimming with hostility. Emily could feel the tension in the air thickening. James took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He knew this was no ordinary document check. James took a deep breath, trying to control his emotions as Carter's threatening gaze remained fixed on him. The atmosphere grew heavier, each passing second feeling like an eternity. Sitting in the back, Emily clutched her belly with one hand while placing the other gently on the front seat, silently pleading for calm. Suddenly, the flashing lights of a second police car appeared in the distance. The car pulled up behind Carter and Blake's vehicle. A young officer, Ryan Davis, stepped out with a calm demeanor, his eyes quickly assessing the situation. "What's going on here?" Davis asked, his voice steady but authoritative. Blake turned around, raising an eyebrow but unable to hide his annoyance. "Just a routine check," he replied, his tone laced with reluctance. Davis moved closer, glancing briefly at Emily in the car. The tension in her eyes and the unease on James's face made him pause, sensing something was amiss. "It seems like this is more than just a document check," Davis remarked, his tone calm but laden with implication. Recognizing that Davis's presence might offer a glimmer of hope, James spoke in a deep, authoritative voice. "I'm an FBI agent. My name is James Carter. We're just trying to get home. There's no reason for this to stop." James's words shattered the tense silence like a lightning bolt. Emily exhaled slightly, feeling a brief moment of relief, though it lasted only seconds. Carter laughed derisively, stepping closer to James. "FBI? You think you can intimidate me with that line?" he scoffed, nodding toward Blake, his expression challenging. "Plenty of people claim to be all kinds of things." Blake smirked, adding, "Got a badge, or just words?" Slowly, James reached into his jacket pocket, retrieving a leather wallet. Inside was his shining FBI badge. Holding it up, his cold, unwavering gaze met Carter's. "Here's your proof, and I have the authority to demand you stop this immediately." Instead of backing down, Carter let out a cold laugh, his eyes glinting with defiance. "You think that badge makes you different? To me, you're just another black man with a fancy line." Emily was stunned by the cold, cutting words. She felt her heartbeat quicken, not only out of fear for James, but for the baby she carried. "Please, I'm pregnant," she said, her voice trembling but urgent. "We just want to get home." Standing nearby, Davis sensed the irregularity of his colleague's behavior. "Carter, I think this has gone far enough," he said, his tone more serious now. But Carter shrugged, turning to Davis with a provocative glare. "Ryan, if you don't want to be involved, you'd better stay out of it." Davis hesitated, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. He looked at James, then at Emily, as if weighing whether to intervene further. Finally, he sighed, stepping back. "I'll observe, but if this crosses a line, I will report it." Davis couldn't take his eyes off Emily's worried expression and the resolute determination in James's voice. He took a deep breath and spoke, cutting through the oppressive air. "James Carter is an FBI agent, and this has gone beyond your authority," Davis declared, stepping closer to Carter. "If you continue abusing your power, I'll have to report this immediately." Blake raised an eyebrow, clearly displeased, while Carter's eyes flashed with anger. "Ryan, you think you can interfere in this?" Carter growled. Davis stood firm. "I'm only ensuring things are done by the book. I won't stand by and let injustice happen." The tension escalated as Carter and Blake closed in on James. Carter spoke in a low voice, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. "You should know that badge won't get you out of my town." James met Carter's gaze, his eyes burning with determination and defiance. He knew he had to stay calm for Emily and their unborn child. Yet inside him, a fire of anger against the injustice and racism he was facing began to blaze. The tension around the car hung like an invisible net, stifling enough to make Emily struggle to breathe. James kept his firm gaze locked on Carter, but he knew this had escalated far beyond a routine check. "Step out of the car now, Carter," Carter demanded, his voice sharp and laced with menace. "I need to thoroughly inspect this vehicle. You don't want trouble, do you?" James didn't rush to comply. He glanced at Emily through the rearview mirror, his eyes sending a clear message. "I won't let anything happen to you or the baby." But he also knew that the slightest mistake could make the situation spiral out of control. "We haven't done anything wrong," James replied, his tone calm but resolute. "My wife is pregnant, and we just want to be left in peace." Carter smirked coldly as if James's explanation only deepened his disdain. "I don't care. Step out now, or do you want me to drag you out?" Blake stepped closer, tapping his fingers on the holstered gun at his side, his sharp gaze radiating provocation. "Better listen, unless you want this to get worse." Emily spoke from the back seat, her voice trembling but composed. "Please let me stay in the car. I'm pregnant. This isn't necessary." Carter turned to her, his eyes icy, almost mocking. "Who do you think you are to be giving orders here?" He opened the back door and grabbed Emily's arm as if forcing her to step out. "Don't touch her!" James shouted, stepping out of the car in an instant and positioning himself between Carter and his wife. His eyes blazed with fury, his patience entirely gone. Carter stared at James, momentarily surprised by his reaction, but his expression quickly twisted into a sneer. "You think you're tough? That FBI badge doesn't scare me." James stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. "I'm an FBI agent, and you have no right to treat my wife this way. Any misconduct from you tonight will be reported directly to your superiors." Blake chuckled derisively from behind, casting a glance at Carter. "Hear that, Carter? We should watch out. We've got the big shot FBI here." But Carter didn't back down. Instead, he moved closer to James until their faces were mere inches apart. "You think you can intimidate me with that badge?" Carter said, his voice low, almost a whisper, but each word dripped with menace. "In this town, I am the law." Emily stood to the side, one hand on her belly, feeling her fear intensify with each heartbeat. She looked at James, wanting to stop him, but knowing he was the only barrier protecting their family. When Carter raised his hand as if to shove James back, James held his ground, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Touch me again, and I'll call for FBI backup immediately. You'll lose everything." Carter's eyes flashed with rage, his fist clenched tightly as though battling the urge to act impulsively. Behind him, Blake raised an eyebrow, silently signaling that things were getting out of hand. But Carter ignored the signal. He stared daggers at James before spitting out his words, each one laced with venom. "You're not getting out of this. Neither you nor your wife. Don't think you're special." James didn't respond. He stood his ground, his eyes unyielding, prepared to face whatever came next. The tension in the air was like a taut string, ready to snap at any moment. James remained standing in front of Emily, his gaze locked onto Carter with unwavering resolve. Yet, deep inside, he knew this standoff couldn't last forever. Just then, the phone in James's jacket pocket vibrated, breaking the oppressive silence. He glanced at Emily, seeing the worry etched on her face. Slowly, James reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, careful not to provoke Carter or Blake further. The name on the screen is Lewitt Brown. James answered the call, bringing the phone to his ear. Lewis's deep but urgent voice came through the line. "James, I just received a report. Officers Carter and Blake are targets in an ongoing investigation. They've been implicated in numerous cases of abuse of power and racial discrimination. What's your situation?" James glanced at Carter, who stood with his arms crossed, a smirk of defiance on his face. James spoke tersely, keeping his voice calm. "I'm in an unsafe situation. They've forced us out of the car. Emily is pregnant." There was a brief silence on the other end before Louis replied, his tone more serious. "Listen carefully, James. Hold your ground, but don't escalate. I'm sending Agent Ethan Roberts to your location now. Keep them there until he arrives." 15 minutes later, the headlights of a familiar black SUV pierced through the thick darkness. The vehicle pulled up to the scene, and as the door opened, The tall, imposing figure of Ethan Roberts stepped out. His presence immediately drew the attention of both Carter and Blake. "What's going on here?" Roberts asked, his deep, authoritative voice cutting through the tense air as his sharp eyes locked onto Carter. Carter hesitated, stepping back slightly but trying to maintain composure. "Just a routine check," he replied, his tone laced with sarcasm. Roberts remained unmoved. "Routine? With an FBI agent and his pregnant wife? Doesn't sound right to me. I want a full report on this situation immediately." Carter shot a glance at Blake, clearly unhappy, but he had no choice but to comply with Roberts' demand. As James put his phone back in his pocket, Carter's eyes narrowed at him. "Who was that?" Carter asked with a hint of mockery. "None of your concern," James replied, his tone calm yet commanding. Carter raised an eyebrow and stepped closer. "I don't think you understand your position here. This is my jurisdiction. You have no authority." James didn't respond, meeting Carter's glare with a cold, steady gaze that only seemed to agitate him further. From behind, Blake spoke up, eager to stoke the fire. "Let me guess, he's calling in his FBI buddies to rescue him. Think anyone's coming to save you?" As Blake finished speaking, the sound of a powerful engine echoed from the distance. The SUV's headlights illuminated the scene, forcing Carter and Blake to turn and look. The sleek black SUV stopped at the side of the road. The door opened, and Ethan Roberts stepped out, his commanding presence undeniable. His confident strides brought him closer to the group as his piercing eyes assessed the situation before settling on Carter. "What exactly is happening here?" Roberts asked, his voice calm yet cutting. Carter took a step back, his expression a mix of surprise and frustration. "Just a routine check," he muttered, though his tone now lacked its earlier confidence. Roberts advanced, his eyes briefly scanning James before resting on Emily. He quickly grasped the gravity of the situation. "Routine check? It looks like you've overstepped your authority." Blake, refusing to back down, interjected. "He claims to be FBI, but we haven't verified it yet." Without a word, Roberts pulled a gleaming FBI badge from his jacket and held it up in front of Carter and Blake. "I'm Agent Ethan Roberts, FBI, and I have full authority to verify that. Carter, Blake, you will step back now and let me handle this." Carter clenched his jaw, clearly displeased, but Roberts' steely gaze left him no room to argue. Blake exhaled sharply, exchanging a look with Carter before the two reluctantly stepped back a few paces. Roberts turned to James, his expression softening slightly but remaining serious. "James, are you and your wife okay?" James nodded. "We're fine, but this situation has gone far beyond what's acceptable." Roberts looked at Emily, offering her a reassuring nod. Then he turned back to Carter and Blake, his voice cold and unyielding. "I'll be documenting every detail of this incident, and I assure you, your actions tonight will not go unnoticed." Agent Roberts' sleek black SUV disappeared into the night, but the tension still hung heavily in the air. James carefully drove away from the scene with Emily, trying to steady his hands on the wheel even as his mind churned over the events that had just unfolded. In the back seat, Emily sat silently, one hand resting on her belly while the other gripped the edge of the seat. "Are you okay, James?" Emily asked, her voice trembling with concern. James glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his gaze softening when he saw her worried expression. "I'm fine, Em. We'll be at the hotel soon. try to rest. It's all over now." But deep inside, James knew it was far from over. Carter and Blake's unusual aggression, their threatening stares, and Carter's openly hostile words went beyond mere racial prejudice. There was something deeper, something far more dangerous driving their actions. They arrived at a small, modest hotel on the edge of town about 20 minutes later. It was humble but clean. James quickly escorted Emily to their room and urged her to rest. "I need to make a few calls," he said, his voice firm. "Don't worry. I'll handle this." Emily nodded, but the unease in her eyes was unmistakable. "Be careful, James. I don't want this to escalate." James stepped into the empty hallway and pulled out his phone, dialing Lewick Brown. The line picked up almost immediately. "Lewa," James began, tension lacing his voice. This wasn't just a routine stop. Carter and Blake weren't acting out of simple bias. There's something else going on. There was a brief pause before Lewis replied, his tone measured and serious. "I think you're right. I just reviewed their files. Carter and Blake aren't just under investigation for racism. They're tied to a larger, underground network." James frowned. "What kind of network?" Lewis exhaled before explaining. "We suspect they're part of a covert organization operating within the police force. This group is connected to money laundering, smuggling, and racketeering. People like Carter and Blake are often used to silence or intimidate anyone who poses a threat to the organization." A chill ran down James's spine. "Why would they target me? I don't have any cases tied to this region." Louis paused, then spoke with caution. "We don't know the exact reason yet, but it's possible you or your family became a target because they believe you have some kind of information. You need to be extremely careful, James. I'm sending reinforcements." James gripped the phone tightly, his expression darkening. "Understood. I won't let anything happen to Emily." When James returned to the room, he found Emily asleep, though her rest was restless. Her hand still rested on her belly, her face etched with exhaustion from the night's stress. Quietly, James sat by the window, staring into the stillness of the night outside. But his mind was anything but calm. If what Louis had said was true, both Emily and their unborn child were in real danger. This wasn't just a random stop or a case of routine abuse of power. It was a genuine threat from an underground organization capable of manipulating the police system. James opened his laptop, beginning to dig into Carter and Blake's history. Old reports of abuse, lawsuits that had been suspiciously dismissed, and connections to shadowy financial organizations started to surface. His eyes narrowed as pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. But he also knew the more he uncovered, the deeper he'd be drawn into a perilous web of corruption and danger. The faint glow from the street lamp outside the hotel window wasn't enough to dispel the darkness clouding James's mind. Sitting beside the sleeping Emily, he mulled over the information Lewis had shared. But the biggest question remained unanswered. Why had he been targeted? James's phone vibrated, breaking the oppressive silence. He quickly answered the call, Louis's voice coming through, more urgent than usual. "James, we just uncovered a location connected to Carter and Blake. It's a warehouse on the outskirts of town, used for the organization's underground activities. I'm not sure what's being stored there, but it might be tied to why you've been targeted," Lewis said. James was silent for a moment, thinking fast. "I'm going now," he replied firmly. "James, don't go alone," Louis warned. "We haven't assessed the full scope of the danger. Wait for my team." But James couldn't wait. He wasn't willing to let the threat linger for another second, especially with Emily and their unborn child at risk. Emily woke as James gently shook her. "Emily, I need you to come with me," he said, his voice soft but laced with tension. Emily looked at him, her eyes weary but resolute. "What's going on?" James nodded grimly. "I need to investigate a location, but I can't leave you here alone. I need to make sure you and the baby are safe." Emily hesitated for a moment, then took his hand, her gaze steady. "I'll go with you. We'll face this together." Their car rolled along the dark road toward the warehouse Louis had mentioned. The air in the car was heavy. Neither of them spoke, but they both felt the looming danger. When they arrived, the warehouse loomed like a giant shadow in the desolate field. The surrounding dilapidated buildings stood as silent witnesses to whatever had transpired there. James parked the car a short distance away, turned off the lights, and scanned the area carefully. "Stay in the car," he said, his tone firm. "No," Emily replied immediately, her eyes filled with determination. "If you're going, I'm going. I can't let you face this alone." James hesitated for a few seconds, then nodded. "Okay, but stay close to me. If anything feels wrong, run back to the car. Do you understand?" Emily nodded. The two of them stepped out of the car and began walking slowly toward the warehouse. The cold air enveloped them, an eerie contrast to the summer season. It felt as though every sound had been swallowed by the oppressive darkness. James could sense unseen eyes watching them from somewhere. James led Emily deeper into the warehouse, where they discovered a room filled with electronic equipment, computers, recorders, and communication devices. The dim flicker of old fluorescent lights cast strange shadows across the space. The room smelled of oil and rust, a lingering sense of decay and corruption. Emily entered, her eyes quickly scanning the room. The faint ticking of a wall clock echoed in the stillness, amplifying the stifling atmosphere. "If we disable this system, they'll lose their ability to communicate and coordinate. It would put them at a disadvantage," she said, her voice quiet but firm. James nodded, though his worry was evident. "Are you sure? If you're caught—" Emily interrupted, taking his hand. "James, I can't just sit and wait for this to blow over. I can do this." "Something's not right," James whispered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The warehouse door creaked open, as though issuing a silent challenge. A faint light seeped through the crack, revealing the outlines of towering shelves. "Are you sure about this, James?" Emily asked, her voice small but tinged with concern. James turned to her, squeezing her hand tightly. "We don't have another choice. If this is the only way to protect you and the baby, I'll see it through." They stepped inside, their breaths slow and cautious. The warehouse was cold, the air thick with the smell of metal and oil. Dusty shelves cast strange, looming shadows, like silent sentinels watching their every move. James suddenly stopped, pulling Emily behind him. A faint but distinct sound echoed from the far end of the warehouse. Footsteps. "We're not alone," James said, his voice low and taut, like a tightly drawn string on the verge of snapping. Footsteps echoed through the cold warehouse, each step striking the heavy air like a drumbeat. James gently grabbed Emily's hand, guiding her a step back as his eyes scanned the dark corners of the warehouse. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out from the end of the hallway. "James Carter, is that you?" James turned, squinting as Jack Thompson emerged from the shadows. Jack was a former FBI colleague, someone James had worked with on several major cases. He looked the same as ever, tall, sharp-eyed, and wearing his trademark confident half-smile. "Jack, what are you doing here?" James asked, his tone a mix of surprise and suspicion. Jack approached with his hands raised, a gesture of reassurance. "Relax. I'm not your enemy. I heard you were in trouble and thought I should help." James glanced at Emily before turning back to Jack. "How did you know I was here?" Jack chuckled softly, though a flicker of something unreadable crossed his eyes. "An old friend of ours, Louis, mentioned it. I've been investigating a major criminal network, and it looks like we're on the same path." James remained still, but unease crept through him. "If you're here to help, why not contact me directly?" Jack shrugged, trying to appear casual. "You know how it is, James. Sometimes this job requires flexibility. But we can talk later. Right now, the priority is getting Emily and you out safely." Emily tightened her grip on James's hand, a silent signal that she shared his unease. As Jack led them deeper into the warehouse, the air grew colder. Overhead, lights flickered, casting intermittent shadows that created an eerie, disorienting atmosphere. Jack stopped in front of a large door and turned to face James. "Behind this door, I think you'll find what you're looking for," Jack said, his smile now carrying a strange undertone. James frowned, stepping closer. "What are you playing at, Jack? This isn't how an agent operates." Jack's smile faded, his posture straightening as his expression turned cold. "You're sharper than I thought, James, but unfortunately, being sharp won't save you from this." As Jack finished speaking, the lights in the warehouse went out, plunging everything into darkness. Emily let out a small gasp, and James immediately pulled her close. "Emily, stay with me. Don't move away." In the darkness, James could hear footsteps rushing from multiple directions. They were no longer alone. James drew his gun from his side, his other hand gripping Emily's tightly. He whispered, "Follow me. Stay quiet." They moved cautiously, James relying on his memory of the layout to navigate. The footsteps grew louder, closer, faster. Suddenly, a beam of light from a flashlight pierced through the darkness, forcing James to pull Emily behind a large shelf. "They're here! Find them!" A commanding voice echoed, harsh and authoritative. James couldn't see their pursuers clearly, but he was certain they were operatives of the underground network Louis had warned him about. Emily whispered, her voice trembling, "James, what do we do now?" James squeezed her hand firmly, his voice low but resolute. "I'll get you out of here. Trust me." Through the darkness, James spotted a small emergency exit at the back of the warehouse. Guiding Emily toward it, he carefully pushed the door open. But, just as he did, a figure emerged from behind and grabbed his arm. "Not so fast, James," Jack's voice growled. "We're not done yet." Jack was no longer the trusted colleague James once knew. His eyes were cold, and his smile now carried nothing but malice. James didn't reply. Instead, he delivered a swift punch, forcing Jack to stumble backward. The sound of the scuffle caught the attention of the others. James turned to Emily, urgency in his voice. "Run! Don't stop!" Emily nodded, fear in her eyes but determination on her face. She darted through the exit while James turned to confront Jack and the others. As James faced the approaching men, a series of gunshots rang out from behind. The sudden barrage forced Jack and his crew to dive for cover. Flashlight beams illuminated the darkened warehouse as a commanding voice shouted, "Don't move! FBI!" Agent Roberts, flanked by Ryan Davis and a team of agents, stormed in through the back entrance, quickly gaining control of the situation. "Davis, secure the east side," Roberts barked, his gun trained steadily on the criminals. Davis nodded, leading a group of agents to flank the remaining operatives, creating an opening for James. "James, we've got this. Get Emily out of here. We'll handle the rest," Davis called out. The sound of footsteps echoed in the cold warehouse, each step slicing through the oppressive air. James crouched low, holding his breath as he crept forward with his gun in hand. The emergency exit was only a few steps away, but a cold, mocking laugh froze him in place. "James Carter, what an honor to finally meet you." A deep, authoritative voice called out from above. James looked up, his eyes locking on a man standing on the staircase leading to the second floor of the warehouse. The man was tall, dressed in a dark suit, his sharp features illuminated by the faint glow of surrounding flashlights. A dim beam from an overhead bulb cast weak light across his face, highlighting a smirk filled with derision. In the heavy silence, the faint creak of metal from the stairs under his feet amplified the sense of menace as he descended slowly. "Victor Hale," James said, his voice cold and sharp. "So, you're behind all of this?" Victor stepped down deliberately, exuding authority with every move. He wasn't rushing, he was in control. "I've heard so much about you, James. A brilliant, brave, and resourceful agent, but also a monumental thorn in my side." James gripped his gun tightly, his gaze never wavering from Victor. "If this is about my investigation in Chicago, you're wasting your time. I don't back down." Victor stopped a few feet away, his smirk now openly mocking. "Chicago? No, James. This isn't just about Chicago. This is about how you've been ruining our plans for years." James frowned. "I don't understand. Why target me?" Victor tilted his head slightly, his eyes gleaming with contempt. "You think you're a hero, don't you? But in your so-called pursuit of justice, you've destroyed some of our most important operations. Do you think investigating the money laundering and arms network in Chicago was a coincidence? Every raid, every bust, it's cost us millions of dollars and dozens of key players." Victor's smirk vanished, replaced by an icy glare. "But that's not all, James. Do you remember the case in Dallas 3 years ago? The one where you set up and captured Thomas Hale, my brother? Thomas wasn't just my brother. He was the mastermind of our entire Southern network, and thanks to you, he's rotting in a federal prison." James stiffened slightly, but his gaze remained firm. "Thomas Hale destroyed the lives of thousands of innocent people. If you think I regret taking him down, you're wrong." Victor's smirk returned, though bitterness flashed in his eyes. "You destroyed my family, James, and now I'm going to destroy yours. You'll pay for everything you've done." James remained calm outwardly, though his heart pounded as Victor stepped closer, his tone turning more menacing. "The bigger problem," Victor continued, "is that you've attracted attention. And when someone like you catches our attention, we don't just look at you, we look at your family." James tightened his grip on the gun. "If you touch my wife or my child, you won't walk away from this." Victor laughed coldly, the sound reverberating through the warehouse. "Your wife, Emily, isn't it? She's brave to stick with you tonight. And the baby, what a blessing. But James, you should know, I'm not the type to make idle threats. Your family has been in our sights for a long time." Victor's words sent a chill through James's veins. He knew Victor wasn't one to speak without intent. "What's your ultimate goal?" James asked, his voice low but simmering with anger. Victor sneered. "My goal? You're not important enough for that, James. You're just a pawn. But when pawns start overturning the chessboard, they become a problem, and I don't let problems stick around." Victor turned and began ascending the stairs again, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Enjoy tonight, James. It might be the last time you see your family safe. But if you're smart, you'll back off. Forget everything, and maybe I'll spare you and your wife." James stood motionless, his eyes blazing. "You don't know me, Victor. I don't back down, and I won't let you harm my family." Victor paused, glancing back at James. "Go ahead, Carter, but I warn you, don't play a game you can't win." With that, Victor disappeared into the shadows, leaving James standing in the empty warehouse, his mind racing with the weight of the threats. He knew the stakes had just risen to a whole new level of danger. James stood silently in the warehouse, his gaze fixed on the spot where Victor had disappeared. The air around him felt thick and heavy, each of Victor's words echoing in his mind. But he didn't have time to dwell on them. He had to act, and he had to act immediately. "James!" Emily's voice called out from the emergency exit, pulling him back to reality. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, clutching the frame, her eyes filled with worry but also glimmering with determination. James rushed toward her, gripping her shoulders to reassure her. "Are you okay? Did they follow you?" Emily nodded but didn't take her eyes off him. "I'm fine, but James, we can't just run. Victor isn't just targeting you, he's coming after our family. We need to stop him." James looked at his wife, feeling the strength in her voice. He knew she was right. "All right, but you need to stay here. Let me handle the rest." Emily shook her head, her eyes unwavering. "No, James. I can help. We'll face this together." James led Emily deeper into the warehouse, where they discovered a room filled with electronic equipment, computers, recording devices, and communication tools. This was the command center for Victor and his organization. Emily sat in the car, her worried eyes following James as he quietly stepped out, gun in hand. She knew she couldn't leave him alone in such a dangerous situation, but she also understood the need to stay safe for the sake of their unborn child. Inside the warehouse, James found the electronic room again. Meanwhile, Emily clutched her phone tightly, ready to provide support. "James, what do you see?" she asked through a small radio clipped to his shirt, her voice soft but tinged with anxiety. James replied in a hushed tone, "This is their command center. We have a chance to disrupt their systems right here." Emily quickly opened her laptop in the car, connecting to James via secure software she had learned to use during a cybersecurity training program. "All right, I'll provide remote support. Try to access their main system and leave the encryption to me," she said, her voice calm and focused. James located an active computer and began feeding her information over the radio. Emily, in turn, started entering commands into her laptop, leveraging her skills to penetrate their network. "James, I need a few more minutes to temporarily disable their communication system," she said. "Good. Work as quickly as you can, Emily, but be careful with the network connection. If they detect you, they'll know where you are," James reminded her. After a few minutes, Emily's voice came through the radio again. "It's done. Their system is temporarily down. You can collect the documents without being tracked." James exhaled deeply, scanning the room again before spotting a small safe hidden beneath a shelf. As he worked on opening the safe, Emily stayed on the line, her voice steady and encouraging. "James, be quick and stay safe. I'll be here, waiting for you." A long beep from the computer signaled the system had been fully compromised. Emily retrieved the USB drive and glanced back at James, giving him a nod to indicate she had finished her task. As Emily completed her part, James focused on the safe. Using the skills he had learned in the FBI, he managed to unlock it and was stunned by its contents, a thick stack of documents. James quickly skimmed through the pages. They were detailed lists of individuals Victor had corrupted, police officers, FBI agents, and even high-ranking politicians. Familiar names leaped off the page, sending a chill down his spine. "We're dealing with something much bigger than I thought," James said as Emily joined him. He pointed to the list, his eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. "This isn't just about Carter or Blake. This is an entire system being manipulated." Emily glanced at the list, her hand tightening around the USB drive in her pocket. "What do we do next, James?" James looked deeply into his wife's eyes, gratitude and admiration filling his chest. "We expose them, but first we need to get out of here safely." James tightened his grip on the stack of documents in his hand, his eyes blazing as he looked at Emily. "We need to get out of here immediately," he said firmly. Emily nodded, still clutching the USB drive containing the evidence she had just downloaded. They moved quickly out of the room filled with equipment, but before they could get far, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. James stopped abruptly, pulling Emily behind a large shelving unit for cover. "James Carter," a deep, cold voice rang out, freezing the air. James turned toward the source of the voice and saw Victor Hale slowly stepping into the room, his icy gaze scanning the space. Behind him were two henchmen armed with weapons, but Victor raised a hand, signaling them to stop. "There's no need for violence here," Victor said, his eyes locked onto James. "I want to talk, Agent Carter, a conversation between two men." James stepped out of hiding, standing tall as he faced Victor. "I have nothing to say to you," he replied, his tone resolute. Victor smirked and took a few more steps closer. "Oh, but I have plenty to say to you. I must admit, I admire the way you and your wife managed to derail my plans tonight. Emily is brilliant, isn't she? A remarkable woman. And I'm sure you'd do anything to protect her and your unborn child." James clenched his fist, his eyes never leaving Victor. "Don't you dare mention my family!" Victor raised his hands as if in appeasement, but his smile carried an unmistakable challenge. "James, think carefully. You're about to be a father. You want to protect your family, don't you? Because if you continue this fight, everything you hold dear will be dragged into danger. Sometimes, walking away is the best way to protect the ones you love." James knew Victor was trying to shake his resolve, but he also knew that backing down now would not only endanger his family, but leave countless innocent people at the mercy of Victor's network. As James and Victor faced off, the sound of police sirens blared outside the warehouse. Ethan Roberts led a team of agents inside, their weapons drawn and ready. "Victor Hale, you're surrounded," Roberts declared, his voice firm and commanding. Victor smirked, though a flash of caution crossed his face. "Go ahead, Roberts. Do you think you've won?" Meanwhile, Davis and his team secured the warehouse, blocking any potential exits. Davis quickly moved to James's side, offering support in the final confrontation. James, you don't have to do this alone. We'll end this together." "My family will be safe," James said, his voice like steel, "because I won't let you or anyone else threaten them." Victor shrugged, taking a few steps back, his eyes as cold as ever. "How unfortunate. You've chosen the hard way." As Victor finished speaking, he signaled to his henchmen to advance, but James was ready. In a flash, he lunged at Victor, knocking him to the ground before the henchman could react. Emily, watching from a safe distance, saw her husband fighting Victor. The henchmen tried to move in, but James skillfully used the shelving units to block their path. The fight between James and Victor intensified. Victor was strong and skilled, but James, fueled by his FBI training and his determination to protect his family, gradually gained the upper hand. With a powerful strike, James brought Victor down, leaving him gasping on the floor. James stood over him, his gaze unwavering. "Your game is over, Victor," James said, his voice low and firm. Victor looked up at him, a faint smirk on his lips. "You think capturing me will end this? My network is far bigger than you can imagine." James didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out his phone and called Louis. "I've got everything," he said. "Evidence, the list, and the ringleader. Send the team immediately." Emily stepped up beside James, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We did it," she said, her voice soft but resolute. James looked at his wife, his expression softening. "Yes, but this is just the beginning." The headlights of the police vehicles illuminated the warehouse, cutting through the cold night. James stood next to Emily, both of them breathing heavily after the tense confrontation with Victor. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, bringing a fleeting sense of safety amid chaos. Lewis and Agent Ethan Roberts stepped out of a black SUV, weapons at the ready, their sharp eyes quickly scanning the area. Lewis walked toward James, his face a mix of worry and relief. "James, are you all right?" Louis asked, his gaze briefly landing on Emily. James nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "We're fine, but Victor and his network won't be easily dismantled. We need to act fast before they cover their tracks." Roberts approached, glancing at Victor, now handcuffed and surrounded by the tactical team. "He's not going anywhere, but we need to process these documents quickly. If not, they'll erase every trace." James escorted Emily to Louis's car, ensuring she and their unborn child were safe. "Get some rest," he said gently, though his voice carried exhaustion. Emily grasped his hand tightly, her eyes filled with determination. "James, I know there's more work to do, but remember the baby and I are always here for you." James smiled faintly, placing his hand over hers before turning back to Louis and Roberts. "How much time do we have before they realize their plan has been exposed?" "Not long," Louis replied, his tone grave. "We need to secure these documents in the FBI's protected system to prevent tampering. I've also contacted a few trusted investigative journalists. The public needs to know the truth." Roberts nodded, his expression sharp. "Victor isn't the only problem. The people on this list, police officers, government officials, they won't sit quietly. They'll do everything to protect themselves." At a major press conference organized by the FBI, James and Lewis stood before rows of cameras, preparing to unveil the full truth. Behind them, a large screen displayed indisputable evidence. The list of individuals Victor had corrupted, clandestine transactions, and details of the vast criminal network he ran. James stepped up to the podium, his gaze sweeping across the crowd of reporters. "Today, we are not just here to expose a criminal network. We are here to send a message. Justice cannot be bought. No one is above the law." Lewis followed, his voice steady and commanding. "We call on every citizen to stand up and speak out. This isn't just the FBI's fight. It's a fight for all of us." Their words spread rapidly, igniting public outrage. Officials and officers implicated in the scandal were summoned for investigation one by one. Though Victor remained calm in custody, James knew his days of freedom were over. The legal battle that followed was anything but easy. Those implicated in the corruption had power and resources. Evidence was tampered with, and witnesses were intimidated. But James and Louis remained undeterred. With support from Roberts and independent investigative journalists, they continued peeling back the layers of deceit. Emily, though heavily pregnant, stayed by James's side, encouraging him during the toughest moments. "You're not just fighting for me and the baby," she said, her voice steady and her eyes full of trust. "You're fighting for all the people who can't defend themselves." Her words gave James renewed strength. He knew that no matter how difficult the battle became, he wouldn't stop until justice was served. The courtroom erupted in cheers as the final verdict was announced. Victor Hale and his accomplices were officially convicted. Once proud faces now hung low, knowing there was no escape from justice. James stood outside the courtroom, his gaze fixed on the frenzy of reporters capturing every moment of this monumental case. In the days following the warehouse confrontation, James and the FBI team faced not only imminent dangers, but also the grueling task of securing and analyzing the evidence. The documents and USB drive Emily had obtained became the cornerstone of the investigation, though decoding and verifying the information proved painstakingly difficult. The team worked tirelessly in a high-security FBI facility. "This data is encrypted with sophisticated methods," Louis said, staring at the computer screen. "We'll need more time to fully decrypt and verify this list." Despite his exhaustion, James remained focused. "We don't have the luxury of time. Victor and his associates won't just sit idle. They'll try to cover their tracks." The preparation for the press conference was equally intense. High-ranking officials within the system exerted silent pressure and even issued threats to prevent the FBI from exposing the truth. "We must ensure every bit of information is securely protected before we go public," Roberts emphasized during an emergency meeting. Emily, despite her pregnancy, played a vital role in supporting James from behind the scenes. She spent hours researching the names on the list and providing crucial leads to the investigation team. "They won't stop," she told James one tense evening, "but I know you'll see this through." When all evidence was verified, the FBI scheduled a major press conference. "This isn't just about justice. It's about restoring public faith in the legal system," Lewis said with conviction. James nodded, fully aware that they were stepping into the most critical phase of this battle. Lua approached James, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We did it," Lewis said, his voice tinged with relief. James nodded, though his face remained serious. "This is just the beginning. There's still much to do to clean this system from the roots." Lewis smiled knowingly. "And we'll keep fighting. But today, you should go home, James. Emily and your child need you more than ever." At another corner of the courthouse, Victor, handcuffed and flanked by officers, was led away under the watchful eyes of the crowd. His once defiant demeanor had faded, though he managed a final glance at James, his eyes filled with challenges. "James Carter," Victor said, his voice deep but loud enough for James to hear. You've won this time, but don't think you can change everything. The system isn't so easily overthrown." James met his gaze, unflinching. "Maybe not, but every step we take brings us closer to justice. And no one, not even you, can stop that." James and Emily returned home, ready to welcome their first child. The house, once shrouded in tension, now brimmed with light and hope. Emily sat in a rocking chair in the nursery, gently smoothing the small blanket she'd prepared for the baby. James walked in carrying a box of toys he had just bought. "I think our child will love this," James said with a soft smile. Emily smiled back, placing her hand on her belly. "Our child will know they were born into a family willing to fight for what's right." James moved closer, resting his hand over hers. "Not just our child, but everyone we've fought for and will continue to protect. We've proven that justice doesn't bow to fear." The story of James and Emily spread quickly, becoming a symbol of courage and resilience against injustice. News articles, TV programs, and social movements hailed them as true heroes. For James and Emily, however, it wasn't about fame. It was about protecting their family, standing against corruption, and leaving a legacy for future generations. One warm afternoon, James and Emily sat on their porch, watching their baby sleep peacefully in the cradle. James took Emily's hand, his voice deep with emotion. "We've been through so much, and now we're stronger than ever." Emily smiled, her eyes full of love. "Because we were never alone, James. Unity and trust carried us through it all." The story ends with the Carter family reunited, delivering a powerful message. When we stand together, no injustice is insurmountable. This was the challenging yet inspiring journey of James and Emily Carter in their fight against injustice. Their story reminds us that with courage and solidarity, no barrier is too great to overcome. What do you think about James's decision when confronting Victor? What would you have done in his place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more meaningful and inspiring content. See you in the next video.